The pitch deck had my name on it. Every single slide. I know because I built it at her kitchen table, on her laptop, while she made us coffee, and told me it was the best idea she'd ever heard. I found that out on a Thursday morning, standing in line at a coffee shop I'd never been to, staring at a logo on the wall that made my stomach drop through the floor. But I need to go back. Because none of this makes sense without what came before. We had been best friends for 11 years. Not the kind of best friends who text occasionally and grab lunch twice a year. The kind who know each other's passwords, who have a key to each other's apartment, who show up at 2 in the morning when something breaks. She was in the front row at my mother's funeral. I drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to help her move out of an apartment she shared with a man who didn't deserve her. 11 years of that. 11 years of being the kind of friends most people only read about. I had been working in marketing for a mid-size firm for 6 years, and I was good at it, but I was tired. Tired of making other people's visions feel real. Tired of pouring everything I had into brands that didn't belong to me. So I started building something in the margins of my life, early mornings before work, weekends, lunch breaks. A consulting service specifically for small women-owned businesses that couldn't afford the firms I worked for, but desperately needed what those firms provided. Affordable strategy. Real results. A sliding scale model, so the barrier to entry was low enough to actually matter. I had a name. I had a logo concept. I had a pricing structure, and a service menu, and a client acquisition plan. I had, by the time I brought it to her, 63 pages of documentation and a pitch deck I was proud of. She was the first person I told. Of course she was. We spent an entire weekend at her apartment going through it. I walked her through every slide. She asked questions, good questions, the kind that made me sharper. She suggested I add a section on testimonial strategy. She poured the coffee. She said, at the end of Sunday night, that I was going to change people's lives with this. She looked me in the eyes when she said it. Can you imagine sitting across from someone like that, not knowing? There was a moment that weekend, it was late, maybe 11 o'clock, and we were both a little tired and a little giddy, the way you get when something feels possible. She had her feet tucked under her on the couch, and she was reading through my pricing page, and she looked up at me and said, "I really think this is it for you." And I believed her. I felt it the way you feel something true, in the chest, not the head. I thought, this is what it means to have someone in your corner. 3 months later, I was still building. I was cautious. I wanted everything perfect before I launched. I was finalizing my website, refining my onboarding process, saving a runway of clients so I wouldn't launch into silence. My friend, meanwhile, had started asking fewer questions about my progress. I noticed it but didn't name it. She seemed distracted. Busy. I assumed she had things going on. I was standing in line at a coffee shop in a neighborhood I didn't usually visit. I'd been meeting a potential contractor nearby when I saw it. A logo on a chalkboard sign by the door. Clean design. Feminine but professional. The name of a consulting service for small women-owned businesses. I read the tagline twice. I pulled out my phone and found the website in under a minute. Sliding scale pricing. Testimonial strategy featured prominently on the services page. A section titled Real Results for Real Businesses. The founder's photo was at the bottom. It was her. I stood in that line for I don't know how long. The person behind me said, "Excuse me," twice before I moved. I walked outside and sat on a bench, and I didn't call anyone. I just sat there with my phone in my hand and read every page of her website the way you read something you already know is going to be worse the further you go. I was right. She had launched 3 months ago. Quietly. No announcement to me, no mention of it, nothing. And I had seen her 4 times in those 3 months. We had gotten dinner. We had talked on the phone. Not once. Not once had she said a word. The pricing structure was different enough that you'd have to know what you were looking at. But I knew what I was looking at. The service categories. The language around accessibility and affordability. The specific framing of the sliding scale model. I had written an entire paragraph in my documentation about why that framing mattered. the exact words I'd used to explain it to her on that Sunday night. Those words were on her website. I went home. I opened my laptop. I pulled up my original documentation, the 63 pages, and I started going through her site line by line. I found 7 instances of language that was close enough to make my hands shake. And then I found something else. I had sent her my pitch deck as an attachment on a Sunday night 3 months before her launch. I went back through our messages to find it, and I found something I hadn't looked at since I sent it. A read receipt. She had opened it 4 times in the following 2 days. 4 times. And this is the part that made me set my phone face down on the table and sit in the dark for a while. I found the message she sent me the day after her 4th read of my deck. A long, warm message about how excited she was for me, how she knew I was going to crush it, how she was in my corner every step of the way. She sent me that message the day after she read my pitch deck for the 4th time. I want you to think about what that means. I didn't confront her that night. I thought about it. I thought about calling her, texting her, driving to her apartment the way I had driven through a snowstorm for her. But something stopped me, not cowardice. Clarity. I wanted to know exactly what I was walking into before I walked in. So I kept digging. Her business was registered with the state. I looked up the filing date. She had registered it exactly 9 days after that Sunday we spent at her apartment going through my deck together. 9 days. I have to let that land for a second. 9 days after she told me I was going to change people's lives with this idea, she had quietly driven downtown and filed paperwork for her own version of it. She had been sitting across from me at dinner, 4 separate dinners, with that information in her. She had asked me how my launch prep was going. She had told me to take my time, not to rush it, to make sure I felt ready. She had been hoping I would wait. I called my sister that night, the only other person I told. My sister listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which is not like her. When I finished, she said, "What do you need?" I said I needed to know what to do next. She said, "You launch this week. And then you deal with her." She was right. And I knew it. I worked for 5 days straight. I finished the website. I finalized the onboarding documents. I reached out to the 8 potential clients I'd been warming up for months and told them I was ready. 3 of them signed within 48 hours. I launched on a Friday. And then I called her. She answered on the 2nd ring, warm and easy the way she always was, and she said my name like nothing had changed. I said, "I need to talk to you about your business." A pause. Not long. Maybe 2 seconds. But I had known this woman for 11 years, and I knew what that pause meant. She said, "What about it?" I said, "I know when you registered it. I know what's on your services page. I know you read my pitch deck 4 times before you filed the paperwork." Silence. I said, "I need you to explain it to me. Because I want to believe there's an explanation I haven't thought of." She said, "It's not what you think." I said, "Tell me what it is, then." What followed was the most carefully constructed sentence I have ever heard a human being speak in real time. She said that the idea had been forming in her head for a while, that our conversation had been inspirational, that she hadn't realized how similar the 2 things were until later, and that she should have said something. Should have said something. I let the silence sit between us for a long moment. I said, "You registered the business 9 days after we spent an entire weekend going over my deck. You had dinner with me 4 times while it was already running. You told me to take my time. You told me not to rush." She said, "I was scared to tell you." I said, "I know, and I meant it. Not as forgiveness. As the last piece falling into place. Because that was the tell. She wasn't scared because she'd made a mistake. She was scared because she'd made a choice, and she'd been managing me ever since. Keeping me close, keeping me slow, keeping me just far enough behind. I said, "I launched this week. 3 clients already." Another pause. I said, "I don't think we should talk for a while." She said my name once, the way people do when they don't have anything else. I ended the call. I sat in my car in the parking garage for 40 minutes and didn't move. Not because I was broken. Because I was trying to figure out what you do with 11 years when you find out They contained something you never saw. I don't think I found the answer that day. I'm not sure there is one. Here is what happened next. My business grew. Slowly at first, then steadily. Within 4 months, I had 11 clients. Within 8 months, I had a waiting list. The sliding scale model worked exactly the way I had believed it would. It opened doors that were usually closed, and word spread the way it spreads when something is genuinely useful to people who need it. Her business grew too, for a while. But she had launched, without fully understanding what she was building. She had the shape of my idea, without the years of industry knowledge behind it. Without the specific expertise that made the idea more than a concept. The pitch deck was a document. I was the document. 6 months after our phone call, she sent me a message. Not an apology exactly, more of an accounting. She said she had made choices she couldn't undo, and that she thought about it a lot. She said she hoped I was doing well. I read it twice, and then I put my phone down and went back to the proposal I was writing for a new client. A woman who had been running a handmade ceramics business out of her garage for 3 years and had never been able to afford professional strategy. We had been working together for 6 weeks. She had just gotten her first wholesale order. I did not write back. Some people would say I should have. Some people would say closure requires response. That silence is its own kind of wound. But I had built something real. Something that was entirely mine, that no one had handed me, that no one could file paperwork for 9 days after watching me build it. I had 3 clients, on the day I confronted her. I had a waiting list 6 months later. I had a woman in a garage in my city who was, for the first time in 3 years, being taken seriously. I didn't need to write back. The last thing she ever said to me, the real last thing, on that phone call was my name. Just my name. The way she'd said it 1,000 times before, across 11 years of coffee and snowstorms and front rows and late Sunday nights. It sounded different at the end. Smaller than it used to. I think she knew, even then, that the name was going to matter more than she had counted on. She was right about that. She just had the wrong reason.